Hey guys, Eric Gillette here, and welcome to In the Studio, a new series I'm starting where I take you in the studio and I show you my processes, whether it be composing, arranging, mixing, mastering, any and all of those things. But for this week, I'd like to start with mixing, specifically how I approach the drums for the album Stranger Than Fiction by the band Nth Ascension. They are a band from the UK, really great band, and I had the pleasure of mixing the album, and it comes out on May 31st, so be on the lookout for that. But for now, let's jump into Pro Tools and take a look at how I achieved the drum sounds for that album. Okay, here we are in the session, so let's start by letting you hear the final drums by themselves, and then I'll kind of go back to the beginning and let you hear the raw files, what I started with, and then kind of explain how I got to where we are here. Okay, so let's start with the kick, and I will solo that and take off any of the processing I've done, and then I'll kind of walk you through what I did. So that's the raw kick sound that I was given, and let's start with the first thing I did, which was I time adjusted, and I got this trick from Warren Hewart. Has a lot of great videos on YouTube, so check him out. Produced Like a Pro, really excellent videos, and I've picked up a lot of cool things. And that's the beauty of YouTube and everything these days, is that you can learn a lot of different things quickly and add to your bag of tricks. And some of you probably already know a couple of these tricks I'm going to show you, but there might be a few that don't. So I'm hoping that you can learn something new and add it to your workflow. So the first thing I did, and usually do with drums, is I will time adjust the kick, or kicks in this case, and snares, toms, and all of that to be in time and in phase with the overheads. Because when you think about it, when things line up and they're hitting all at the same time, it's going to be much more punchy, much more powerful. So I noticed that I needed to delay this about 35 samples. One easy way to do that is to take your overheads. I'm going to slide them up to this kick. You can see here that the kick is hitting quite a bit earlier than the overheads are picking it up because the mics are further away. I've got a mic on the inside of the kick drum, and then the overheads are who knows how many feet away from that. So that's just how sound travels. So this is going to adjust that and slide it back in time to be hitting along with the overheads. And I'm doing the same with the snares, toms, etc. Okay, then the next thing I did was some pretty drastic EQing. I think the main drastic things were probably some certain frequencies that I didn't quite like. So let's flatten that out, and I'll kind of walk you through each thing. Okay, the first thing I did was roll off some of the super, super low end, about everything below 33. The next thing I did was a pretty significant boost around 60 to 70 hertz. Just to get a little more of that low end punch through there. And then I dipped a little around 130. And then here's the first real drastic one, around 140. So what I'll do is I'll crank that up so you can hear what it was that I was hearing that needed to be pulled out. So yeah, that's not a real pleasant sound. Goom, goom. Yeah, that's what I wanted to get rid of. So I notched that out pretty heavily, followed by scooping quite a bit of the mids. At this point, I should probably say that I like to get some rough direction from the band as far as what's the sound you're going for. And some of that is in how you record it. A lot of it is actually, but there's certain things you can do to try to get a certain drum sound. And sometimes specifics really help me. And in this case, Craig, the drummer, had told me he loved the sound of the drums from the Black Album by Metallica. Now, given that was recorded in a really specific way and recorded really, really well, and it's one of my favorite drum sounds, rock drum sounds. So I was trying to approach this and to try to sculpt these sounds I was given to get as close as I could get to something like that. And in this case, a pretty heavy scoop of the mids was getting me in that direction, so that's why I have that. It's taking out quite a bit of that boxiness that you're hearing. And then the next thing is I've dipped out another frequency that seemed not pleasant. So let me crank that up and you can hear what that frequency is. Yeah, so that wasn't something that was working well for me, so I just dipped it out. And then I've boosted a little around 3K. Probably just trying to get a little bit more attack, a little bit more of that beater head. And then the final thing I have on this EQ is a high shelf, about 5 dB at 5.5K. And that's just gonna get a little bit more attack, a little bit brighter. And the next thing is I have a gate. And with that, I'm just trying to kind of lower the other sounds that are not the kick drum, whether it be just any cymbals or any snare hits that are kind of bleeding through that. And I'm just trying to reduce it a little, the best that I can. Nothing crazy. And then I have one final EQ, and there's nothing wrong with having more than one EQ on a channel. For a while when I first started, I don't know why, in my brain I thought, well, you just EQ one time and then that's it. But many times I'll use multiple different EQs on one channel to really get what I'm going for. And sometimes certain EQs have a certain thing, they do a certain thing better, or whatever the reason might be. But in this case, I got a R EQ, and I've scooped out a little bit more of the mids, and I think I've boosted around 60 hertz, maybe 2.5 dB or so. So let's hear it without. And then with. And for me, that just sounded better. It got rid of more of that boxiness and a little bit more crisp and punch out of it. Okay, let's take a look at the second kick. And now this isn't a second actual kick drum. This is a second mic on the same kick, and it's on the outside of the kick drum. Now, for my second kicks, I'm usually used to like a sub kick. And in this case, I was getting a lot of cymbals. I can't remember what mic they had on it. I think I had a list at one point. But what I wanted to do with this source is kind of sculpt it into what I would get from a sub kick. So the first thing I did was take an REQ and rolled everything off that I could, basically, until I got to that low rumble punchy sound, and rolled off some of the extreme low. And I'm compressing it. I want the hits to be a little bit more even. So I'm doing a little bit of compression here. Actually, it's quite a bit. At some points, 5 dB of reduction. But that's gonna be blended in pretty low, just to get a little bit more of that sub sound. And then I'm accentuating that with the Max Bass plugin. This is a great plugin if you have anything you're wanting to, whether it be a bass guitar, a kick drum, anything really that you want to just add a little bit more of the bass that maybe isn't there. Now let me crank this up some more. Now if you're on a phone or something, you're probably not going to hear that, but in here or with the subwoofer, you're really going to hear how much that adds. So let me pull that back down, and let's hear these two kick mics together. Okay, so the next thing I have is a kick trigger track. Now that's going to be a sample. So the way I do this is I copy the kick one track and I pull it down with the time adjuster, because you want that to be in time with the overheads as well. I'm boosting some of the highs because that's going to affect how the trigger plugin picks up. You really want the transients to be very present if they're not already. So I'm just accentuating that a little bit. And I have a kick sample. In this case, it's called Black Kick from the Black Album, I think is what they're trying to emulate, which was exactly what I was trying to go for. So this was very nice to be able to have this. And if you guys don't have Steven Slate Trigger, I highly recommend it. It's a great plugin. And let me also emphasize, I use samples, but I try always to just blend them and use them to supplement and not full replacement. That's when things start to sound really kind of fake and unrealistic. So we want to keep this as human sounding as possible. Given that a human played it, that's how we want to keep it. This is just going to be the samples now, the kick sample. And then I'm running that through a stock EQ. I'm pulling down some highs and some lows. I wanted to tighten it up a little bit. Let's hear what that sounds like. And that's pretty quiet. I mean, I'm at -17 here. Let's hear the other two together, and then I'll blend that in. So yeah, that's adding a lot. It's adding a lot of that high-end click and a lot of that low-end punch, and I'm kind of blending it into taste. Again, with this, I'm thinking of it as definitely something that's going to be blended in and not replaced. It's going to be a supplement. It's not going to take over the original sound. I want this to be as human as possible, and I'm going to do that usually by starting with it down, playing the track, and just kind of blending it in together. And so then what I'll do is send all three of those kick tracks to one kick bus and do a little bit of compression on it. I want this to kind of glue those three sounds together and make them a little bit more effective as one. So let's hear without. And with. Okay, yeah, again, that's just kind of gluing all those things together, a light bit of compression, and getting the great modeled sound of this 1176 from Universal Audio. So moving on to the snare now, let's start with the snare top, and let's hear that by itself. Okay, and the first thing I did, again, was time adjust so that the snare hits would hit with the overheads and be as powerful as possible and in phase. And then I have the SSL channel strip plugin from Universal Audio. And let's hear without it one more time, and then I'll play it with. Okay, and now with. Okay, so the first thing I'm kind of doing is, well, I'll start with the EQing. I'm doing a high shelf. I really want to get a lot more snap and crack out of that snare. And then I'm also boosting around 1.5, and I'm cutting out a lot of that, again, the boxy sound I don't really like to hear in drums. It sometimes is around 800, I find, on a lot of the snares and drums that I've worked with. But I'll crank that up so you can kind of hear what I'm talking about. Kind of boxy, papery, thin sound. I don't know how else to describe it. Mid-rangey. I usually don't like that, so I'll kind of scoop a little bit of that out. And then I'm actually adding in maybe between 2 and 250 for some low end to have a lot more power on that snare. So I also have a gate that I am helping to just lower all the sounds that are not the snare. I'll let you hear without it. And with it. Just helps clean it up a little bit. And then I'm also compressing at about a 2-to-1 ratio. If you watch down here, about 3 dB of gain reduction at the most. And then I have my low pass and high pass filters, and I'm rolling everything off kind of below maybe 170, 175, and everything above 12K. I try to always use these filters to roll off high and low, anything I don't think is necessary for that sound. So I don't get a bunch of low buildup or too much cymbals and high. You don't want a piercing sound either. So I really try to think about that every time I get to a new instrument or a new drum. Okay, and then the next thing I have is I'm adding a little bit of distortion, a little bit of saturation on the snare with the driver plugin. And without it. To me, it made it a little bit more powerful and cut through the mix a lot better. Okay, moving on to the bottom snare. Again, time adjuster, so it's in time with the overheads. And we have an SSL channel strip, so let's check out what I'm doing here. The high pass and low pass filter, I'm rolling off quite a bit because with this, I want a lot of the highs. I do want some of the body, and I'm adding that in kind of with the EQ here. But let's just kind of hear how much I'm rolling off. Okay, and I have a gate. This is without the gate. So I'm hearing a lot of other stuff that is not the snare. So this is with the gate engaged. Really helping only get those snare hits to come through. And I'm also compressing around a 3 dB gain reduction, compressing a little bit more heavy than the top snare. It has this button on the top that allows you to flip it from a line to a mic signal and really get that analog, overdriven console sound. And let me play you a little bit of that. Obviously, you can go really drastic with that. In this case, I think I'm barely turning it. Sometimes just flipping it gives you just enough extra mojo, and that, in this case, was enough for me. And then I'm doing some EQing. A high shelf to make it a little bit brighter on the top end. I'll disengage the EQ. And then with the EQ. Okay, now let's hear both those snares together. Okay, and I think, yes, I did flip the phase on the bottom snare, so let's hear those together. When things are out of phase, normally you'll hear they sound thinner, and then when you flip the phase, you feel kind of that body and low end come back, and that's really what we're looking for here. So this is without the phase switch engaged. And then with. And to me, it just seemed a lot more powerful. And you really got to use your ear. You can get in there surgically and kind of look at stuff. I usually try to trust my ear on these things. Okay, and just like with the kick, I have a trigger track. So I copied the snare top down, and I've applied, again, with the time adjustment. And I have these, it's called the Never Snare, off to Never Neverland Black Album. These sounds were just waiting there for me to use on this album. Is great. Okay, and here I'm doing some pretty heavy EQ on that sample, and let's hear without it. And now with. So I'm adding a lot more crisp top end and pulling out a lot of that kind of low end that I didn't think needed to be there. And let's hear those three together. And then I have all three of those, again, going to its own snare bus. And I have an 1176 AE on that, again, doing just some compression to kind of glue all three of those together. Okay, next is the hi-hats, and I don't believe I did a ton of work on these. They already seemed like they had a lot of low end rolled off, although I rolled off a bunch just to make sure. And I'm rolling off quite a bit of high end too, because I don't like when hi-hats are just overly high pitched, piercing. So I wanted to tame them down a little bit. Let's hear without. And then with it engaged. Again, pretty subtle. I was just rolling off some of that high end that I didn't think needed to be there. So let's take a look at the toms really quick. So we have 3 rototoms and 5 regular toms. That's quite a bit of toms. The first thing I'll say about toms is Now these have already been, looks like these regions were consolidated. But you'll notice between the tom hits, it's silence, because what I'll do is go in and strip out all of the noise that's not a tom hit, because all that adds up and can make it really kind of messy. And what I'm really looking for is just the tom hit. And also when editing it that way, it allows me to adjust manually each hit, the attack and release, as opposed to using a gate, which isn't always the best way to do it, in my opinion, because if there's a really dynamic section, you might miss a couple hits if he's hitting really soft or something. So this is just the way I prefer to do it. And on this song, it doesn't look like Roto 1 was hit, so it's not even in there. Let's start with just the regular toms. Okay, let's look at tom 1 first. Again, I started with the time adjuster to make sure it's in time with the overheads, followed by an SSL channel strip. And that's without, and with it engaged. So again, I like to start with the filters and roll off what I don't need from both the top and bottom end. And then I have added quite a bit of a shelf. I felt like the tom sounded a little bit dull, and so I've added a shelf around 8K. And then I'm boosting around 4, and cutting a little bit around 200, and boosting around 165. I'm also compressing pretty heavily. I want to make sure that they're even sounding and the tails are nice and long. And in this case, I don't have a gate because I've edited the toms, kind of done a manual gate on them, so I don't have to do that. It's going to be a lot cleaner sounding that way. And that was pretty much my approach with every tom, was to time adjust an SSL channel, rolling off high and low end that I don't need, compressing, getting rid of certain frequencies I didn't like. In this case, on tom 2, I'll crank up the boxiness that I didn't like. Sounded a little boxy, a little muffly, so I pulled that back quite a bit. And then I added around 160, a little bit more low end. And again, compressing about the same. And tom 3, time adjuster, and then an SSL channel strip. I'll play without. To me, the tom 3 track was a little thin, so I felt like I needed to add, I added quite a bit of low end back into it, around 60 hertz. I actually added a little bit of a boxiness feel, and I rolled off some highs because I felt like it was a little too thin and bright. I'm trying to match that to the other tom sound I already had. For some reason, I remember tom 3 being, it sounded a little bit different than the other toms. And then tom 4, time adjuster, and then an SSL, rolling off again, highs and lows I don't need, compressing. Looks like I'm rolling up some highs with the shelf. I'm also rolling up about 4K and getting rid of some boxiness. I'll play that. And then adding a little bit around 120. Wanted to get a little low mid-range back in there. And that's pretty much it. So let's hear those together. With this fill, he's not hitting tom 5, so let me find, there we go. Without the SSL. A little flat, I needed some crispness. And actually I felt like I needed a little bit more low end, so I rolled that up as well. And let's hear those together. Okay, and then I have the toms going to a parallel compression track, which means all the toms are going out to the master bus, but they're also being sent to this auxiliary track where I'm doing some compression. And I like to do that to kind of even accentuate a little bit more, to get the long tail on the tom and help even them all out. So I'm running them all to the toms parallel compression channel, and I have a CLA 76 compressor. Let's hear what that's doing. Not a ton of gain reduction, but I'm just kind of trying to tame them and keep them all together. But this is a little bit different than how I did it with the snares, where the outputs are all going to that bus. So with the toms, again, they're all going to the master bus, and then this is parallel compression. I guess let's hear the rototoms really quick. Rototom 2 and 3. Let's hear without the channel strips. And then with. So added some crispness, probably took out some mid-range I wasn't liking, and just got those to pop out a little bit more in the mix. Okay, let's take a look at the overheads and let's listen with nothing on them. Let's listen with the SSL channel strips engaged. So with the overheads, I rolled off everything below about 100 and everything above 12K. And then I'm doing a high shelf around 5, removing a little bit of boxiness again around the 800 range, and adding a little bit of low end around 65. And also I'm compressing pretty heavily, maybe about, it's a 4-to-1 ratio. I'm doing quite a bit of gain reduction, 3 to 6 dB of gain reduction. Okay, now let's move on and take a look at these room mics. Now I remember spending a while on these room mics, wishing they sounded a little bit bigger. And also I think I remember them being some sort of what sounded to me like a phase issue. So let's take a look at that without any processing on it. Okay, and then with the SSL channel strips. Okay, and with that, I'm rolling off quite a bit of low end, quite a bit of high end because it was sounding really piercing to me. And that's not something I really wanted with the room mic. Rolling off a bunch of highs here as well, getting rid of a lot of boxiness. And it looks like I have the compression bypassed because I like to slam the room mics to get them to sound even bigger. And I think I didn't end up liking this as much and went with the Kramer Pi compressor, but let's hear what it sounded like with the SSL compression. Let's bypass that again and let's hear how it sounds when using the Kramer Pi compressor. And without it. And with it. Kind of makes it sound like the room is bigger than it was, which is what I was going for. And then some EQing. Rolling off a little bit more of that high end. Some of the cymbals I think I was trying to tame a little bit more. So let's hear that. Okay, moving on to the last section here, which would be effects. So I have 2 different snare verbs. So for the first one, I have Abbey Road Chambers. Let's hear that. This is a great plugin for adding extra character, a little bit of spaciousness to any sound. I love it. Highly recommend it. And then I have another plugin. This one's free, actually. It's called Verbiage. Let's hear what that's doing. This one's going to be a little bit longer, quite a bit longer, actually. But let's check it out. And I'll use these in different sections, maybe even. I'll blend one up higher than the other if I want a really big section, or obviously if it's a quiet down moment, I might have less of it. So I will automate all these to be what I want them to be for that section. Okay, and then we have a drum room where I'm sending all the drums to this bus and just trying again to make the drums sound a little bit bigger by adding a kind of a faux room. And that's what this sounds like. Okay, and then I have a tom verb using the R verb as well. So this is just the tom verb. Okay, let's take a look at the drum bus now. I have an SSL bus compressor doing some light compression, some glue to the overall drum sound. And then I have the Studer A800 tape emulation. And I love this plugin. It does a lot of cool stuff, including some EQ controls, but obviously the tape saturation. I highly recommend this one as well. Let's hear the overall drums without the drum bus processing. Okay, and with the bus processing. All right, that's pretty much it. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be doing a lot more videos like this, so make sure you like and subscribe if you haven't already. And we'll see you next time.